All right, guys. So, hey, sorry about the technical difficulties. My laptop is very old. My name is Kendra Reynolds, so I'm going to be talking to you guys about finding your strengths and embracing your weaknesses. So, just a little bit about me. I like to introduce myself so you guys know that I am a human. Again, my name is Kendra Reynolds. What do I do? So, I am the admissions lead here at We Can Code It. Not here because this is script drop. But at We Can Code It, I'm the missions lead. So originally, I'm not from Columbus. I actually transitioned and moved to Columbus a few years ago. I started out my career journey in education. It's what I ultimately wanted to do. My school was closed, so I transitioned into tech recruiting. Was very fortunate to train under a very good technical recruiter, so loved what I learned and really fell in love with technology, but I'm not a super technical person, and I was missing that helping aspect of helping people in the educational realm. So I found We Can Code It, fell in love with the mission, and it really married the two things that I loved doing. So that's where I am now. We always do fun facts. So fun fact about me, I'm a cat mom, I'm an overall nerd, and I am a charity cosplayer. So just some pictures of me. So I actually dress up like superheroes for different charity events around the area. So if you ever see anybody walking around in a cape or look like Captain Marvel, it's probably me. So yeah, really cool. And my cat is really cute, by the way. So I am here to start helping you guys talk about your strengths and weaknesses. It's trying to understand how to look at them in a different viewpoint. So at the end of the day, knowing that you aren't simply just defined by your strengths and weaknesses, but how to understand them and how to use them really. So getting started, we are going to talk about understanding your strengths. So one of the things that people don't really think about is like, where do strengths actually come from? So you're not just, there's athletic ability and there's some, strength ability and things of that nature. So we're not talking about, yeah, I can run 100,000 miles like when I was first born. So there's two really different theories on how strengths are really brought about. One of those is strengths stems from experiences and interests. So interests are really built upon curiosity and wanting to know more about certain aspects of life. Overall curiosity really encourages us to learn more about these areas through your experience. So also gaining more experience as you kind of begin to develop into that as well. And it really ends up being a strength that we carry for the remainders of our lives. So if you step back and think about it, what was something that you were curious about when you're younger that you consistently use from day to day? One experience that I really seem to know a lot about now is how my brother got into the field that he's in. So my brother is a huge nerd like me. He fixes old radios in his spare time, and that was one thing, one strength that he now has is because when he was younger, it wasn't just, I'm turning on a radio, okay, I'm going to listen to the song. He wanted to know, how does this work? And kept going back farther and farther. When he got into tube radios, he actually has restored hundreds of tube radios at this point. So his entire career is based out of understanding how things work and not just the overall piece of you do this, you turn it on and a song comes out. But what makes that radio actually work? And that was just stemmed from his general curiosity for something that he truly enjoyed when he was younger. The other theory is that strengths can also come about from observations as well. So when you're younger, you're consistently around a certain group of people, and your observations can eventually play into your strengths. So it's not necessarily that you were taking part in that experience that you were learning, but you kept seeing it and seeing it and seeing it, and then towards, now when you're thinking about it, you're like, weird, I kind of developed this out of being consistently in that type of experience as well. Thinking about something that you're around your parents and that you just do, but it's also part of your strengths. This is obviously a little bit more of a higher level experience, but my mom is awesome at baking. I had a cake or a brownie or cookies after every meal I ever ate when I was younger. So watching her bake, I was never actually baking because my mom wouldn't let me touch the stove. But when I was younger, I'm consistently watching things that she's doing. And now, not even baking, but there are certain aspects that I do that I notice that she's done. And I'm just really good at baking, and I never really tried. So having that experience of watching her and taking on these little nuances that she was able to do because she's really good at it actually played into a smaller strength that I didn't really realize that I had. So thinking on a bigger picture, it doesn't have to be something like a skill like baking, but what are some, is it the way that your conversations happen between family members? Were they really good at listening? And are you a really good listener as well? So kind of think about that when you're thinking about, well, where do these strengths come from? It doesn't have to be this big, oh yeah, like I'm super intellectual. It doesn't have to be this big theme, but things that really your experiences around you are where your strengths come from as well. So 2 things that when I was starting to dive into this, I didn't really think about it because you just kind of like, oh, I'm good at this, but you don't really think about where they come from. So if you're ever having a time where you're wondering like, okay, how do I really figure out what strengths I'm good at? This is 2 different ones to kind of review. Now, strengths, or what's called the easy part, I think when we think about strengths, everybody, like, oh yeah, strengths, I'm really good at this. It doesn't always have to be that way. When identifying a strength as humans, like I said, I feel like we get caught up in words. Like you want it to be this super powerful, meaningful, like, yes, this is my strength. But it's also doesn't have to be that serious when you're identifying it. So it has to, it doesn't always have to be strong attributes is what I'm trying to say. Identifying a strength, think about and simplify it. When you're asked that question in an interview, or when you're doing something as speaking with other people, or like filling out a dating profile, all these things come up, like what are your strengths? What are your strengths? And I think we get so caught up in what the words actually mean, and we don't really take advantage of like how to identify what you're really good at. So simplify it. What is something that you love or get lost when you're doing it? Just some examples like, do you love to paint? Can you play the piano? Like, can you strike up a conversation with anybody on the street? Can you fix anything that is given to you? So these all transcend into a strength. So creativity and artistic viewpoints, multitasking, strong communication skills, and empathy. These all have a value and a strength underneath it, but I think we get so caught up in actually feeling like what those are, we don't really know how to identify it and kind of cut through the pieces as well. So, my next slide. Another great thing about strengths too, so I don't ever want you guys to think that we're only going to focus on strengths. There's also this theory like focus on your strengths, diminish your weaknesses. There's value in understanding and using both. So once you've identified what your strengths are, the most important thing is to understand how to use them. So your strengths are not going to be a fit in every single situation, and this is where self-awareness comes in, which is why Tech EI is such a great thing, because that's helping with self-awareness. Both career-wise, relationship-wise, your strengths are not going to be a perfect fit for every person that you're interacting with either. For example, what I do in my daily, on my job is communicating with people. It's understanding motivation. It's understanding goals. It's understanding their strive. So communication is something, I've studied it. I went to college for it. All my jobs have been based in it. But at the same time, I would not be the first person to sign up for a talk about nuclear physics just because I'm good at communicating. So understanding and having that self-awareness as well is super important. So finding your niche, these are some really great ways of how to kind of solidify and identify and putting into certain areas. So obviously knowing in your personal values and your goals. How do your strengths fit within your personal values and your goals? How do your strengths fit into various situations, like we just talked about with my communication skills? I probably sound like a dork right now because I don't know how to talk in front of people, and it's been a really long time since I've done this. But knowing that if I'm working with a group of people and there's how I communicate with my best friend on a day-to-day basis wouldn't be how I'm communicating with someone that I just met for the first time. How I'm delivering a sensitive subject wouldn't be like texting my boyfriend or texting my best friend. There's different varies of communication, so having an idea of how my strength fits in certain aspects. Putting your own style into your strength. So I try to, when I'm talking about communication, I like to, kind of make sure that people understand that I'm also the same person as them in a certain aspect. I've been through certain struggles that we're in the same place and try to relate to them, but that's my style of communication. And if someone else is very strong at communication, because they approach in a different manner, doesn't mean that their strength isn't just the same as mine, but in a different manner. And then understanding your weaknesses, which we'll talk a little bit more about, is another important piece of finding your niche. So again, how does that fit when you're looking into your niche? What are you not as good at? And how does that make you kind of drive that force into something that you consider your niche? So boom, your niche. That's how you figure it out. So embracing your weaknesses. This is actually how I feel right now on the inside. So just so you guys know. So one of the coolest things about weaknesses, it's definitely okay to have them. And that's part of the biggest conversation that I wanted to have. As humans, and I feel like every one of the students who I've spoken to in the entire bootcamp existence have heard me say that, but I think we like to feel like we have to be good at every single thing. Like coming into a new career, you don't want to have that feeling of like, I don't know the answer to this. I experienced this a lot when I was in college. Academics were something that came pretty easy to me, and then I was given something, I was put into like 1,000 different math classes, and I hated it, and I didn't know how to ask for help because I was smart, and I needed to know how to figure this out on my own. So understanding that having a weakness is also about a perspective. It's not necessarily something awful. It's not something that makes you unacceptable as a human or dumb. It's something that gives you perspective on how to move forward. So how to identify your weaknesses is, again, you have to simplify it. So it's something like, what do you generally avoid doing? This might be something that people generally avoid doing, is giving these public talks. So maybe public communication or communication in general is not your strong point, but that doesn't mean that that's something that's going to hold you back. You have other places of your personality that makes you strong. What makes you feel uncomfortable? Again, like these are things that we actually avoid doing. Like I'm not talking about like laundry or like walking the dog. I'm talking about like the things that you're put at work, social situations that you're just like, no, thank you very much. And you want to remove yourself from the situation. And to be honest with yourself about your shortcomings. Again, I feel like it always kind of goes back to that pride thing. Like we want to be the best person, you know, we want to present our best selves. So having that honest conversation with yourself is where you can help yourself find your actual weaknesses. An example, so understanding that your weaknesses aren't always your enemy. So I was thinking, you know, who is like one of the strongest figures that I could talk about? Stephen Hawking is the example I'm going to use. Funny enough, when I was doing a lot of research, there's tons and tons of research about why he was brilliant, why he was amazing, and he was. But did you know that he actually was terrible with communicating with others and actually hated working with other people? Like he would get generally frustrated, actually preferred to work alone, and got extremely irate when anybody would interrupt him. So if you can imagine if someone just took that weakness out of him and made that everything about him, would he be where he was right now? If we only focused on the negative about him. But that's not his strength. Clearly we know what his strengths were. But understanding that it doesn't make you any less of important because you have a weakness. So, you know, whatever situation that resonates with you, like LeBron, if you guys like basketball, like he's obviously the best, but he's not good at everything. You know, Prince is the best guitar player. No one can argue with me on that, but he probably wasn't very good at knitting. So, you know, all these things Prince was not any less of a person because he couldn't, you know, paint or anything like that. You have these things that are awesome for you, but it also helps you focus on what you need to work harder on. And I think of anyone who has went through like a career change, it's not, oh my gosh, I'm terrible at this. It's, okay, now you know where you need to focus a little bit more energy on and help yourself. Yay. And then weaknesses, the benefit of having a weakness. So I think when people hear the word weakness, the really first thought would be not beneficial is not something that would come into mind. Again, most individuals see weaknesses as setbacks, holdups. There's a positive, alluring feeling around having a weakness. So knowing your weakness is also understanding yourself. So when you know yourself, it helps you set limits and also attainable goals. You know, again, I'm always going to relate back to the boot camp because this is what I do on a daily basis. You're never going to build an application or like a successful program from the first day from memory. But that doesn't mean that's not a goal that you can work for, like once you continuously work towards your goal. It allows you to understand where you can improve. So again, sorry bootcamp guys. If someone feels that they're stronger on the front end or stronger on the back end, You're like, they're not like, okay, like this is where I want to be, but if I ever have to see JavaScript ever again, I'm going to cry. That's not like, okay, well then throw it in the trash, you don't need that. But they know it's important for their success in their future. They're going to understand that they're going to need to work a little bit harder here. Same thing with any other aspect. If you're not talking about software development, we're talking about, if you're training for something, if you're like, yeah, I'm going to do, like if you want to do a half marathon or anything like that, maybe you're good for running for 1 mile, maybe you're not good at doing something else. They all help you set attainable goals to make you a better version of yourself. Knowing your weakness also allows you to be acceptant of help or assistance. Again, this is a super hard concept to understand and get used to. Again, it's one of that pride thing, and maybe some of you guys have felt that before where you didn't want to ask for help because you were generally a pretty smart person, and feeling like you're asking for help, you kind of lost that title or that feeling of being a smart person. But it also helps build the strength of others, which leads right into the other one. So regardless in the entire world, when you're working, and whether if it's in your career, your friends, like you cannot be the only person who's good at every single thing. That's a great way to alienate yourself, and that's a great way to make others feel awful. So being that this is about growing other people and mental health as well, being able to work with each other. I'm sure everybody in their friend group like has the one that's the quiet one, the mom of the group, or the dad of the group, that type of feeling. But that's probably not you. You might not be the organizer, but someone else is. You cannot be every single thing in the entire world and be good at every single thing, or else we wouldn't have anyone that's important or special. So, going back to Stephen Hawking, if everyone was good at all the smart science stuff that he did, if everybody was good at basketball, there would be no LeBrons. If everyone was good at guitar, there would be no Princes. And that's the entire understanding of where your weaknesses and strengths lie. So, and my last kind of little shout out to your guys' self is a reminder to be kind to yourself. So this is a very uncomfortable journey, and you're going to consistently see that your strengths and your weaknesses shift back and forth, but also understanding that even though it's uncomfortable, that when you find out a weakness, that doesn't mean you're not going to find another strength, or that you can turn a weakness into a strength by consistently working on yourself. So it's not a linear journey. Remember that it takes time. If you would have talked to me when I was like a sophomore in high school, like I would be like crying right now because I was never a communications person. Something happened to me when I was a junior, senior, and I realized that I loved people and I wanted to help people and be talking and consistently working with everyone. That was not the type of person I was. But it's taken me a long time to be able to be up here and to want to be here as well. So just kind of remember that it's not linear. Sometimes things are going to suck for a little bit before you get better. Your strengths are not something that develop in one day.
When I was putting together this talk, I was trying to think of a title for it, and so it's kind of nice that it follows a talk on strengths and weaknesses. So I thought about entitling it The Power of Vulnerability, but apparently that's a book by some lady named Brene Brown, and I did not know that, so I figured I shouldn't steal her title. Do want to let you know I'm going to make some broad mentions of mental illness and things I struggle with during this talk, so if that's something that might be hard for you to hear, I wanted to let you know ahead of time. And I do want to let you know, so my day job, I am the innovation and product evangelist for a software consulting company called AWH. We build a lot of IoT and machine learning products that make people's lives better, and a lot of those products are in the healthcare industry. This does not, however, make me a qualified medical professional. So I'm going to start by telling you kind of a sad story. My life last year, 2018, was a bad country song. Within about a 6-month period, I fractured my ribs. My husband of 14 years left. I was rear-ended in a car accident. My dog died, and I lost my job. Prior to losing the job, I'd been struggling with it anyway. I'd been hired into a role that was supposed to be a transition out of my previous life as a recruiter. It wound up not being, and there was a mismatch, so I'd been struggling. And I was dealing with all of these losses as I was dealing with recent diagnosis of depression and anxiety that I had just received in 2017. So I was still working with my therapist and my medication to get all that stuff figured out. And the reason I'm telling you all this is because the only way I was going to survive this, both professionally and personally, was to embrace vulnerability. I knew I needed support that year, and I knew that for me to get that support, I had to be willing to opening up to friends about what I was going through, and that was hard. I pride myself on being a strong person who can handle challenges. As much as I can be very much an open book on social media, there are certain things that I do keep very private. So it was very hard for me to open up about these things. And I had to remind myself that even strong people need help sometimes. So vulnerability is defined as the quality or state of being exposed to the possibility of being harmed or attacked, either physically or emotionally. Now, what stood out to me immediately when I saw this definition was it's a possibility. Vulnerability gives us the possibility of being harmed. It doesn't mean that we will actually be harmed, and in my experience, I've found that I've benefited by vulnerability far more than I've been harmed by it. Vulnerability is not the same thing as weakness. Weakness is a lack of strength. It's something that could be a fault, a flaw, something that you struggle with, and whether we like it or not, we all have weaknesses. On the other hand, vulnerability is a state that we sometimes are forced to enter and sometimes we choose to enter. And I've come to think, especially after everything I went through last year and everything it's set up for me this year and in the future, that we should purposely put ourselves in vulnerable states, which is one reason I'm doing this talk right now. So I'd like to share some of what I gained and cover what I risked through vulnerability over the next several minutes. So I knew I couldn't handle all of the losses I went through last year. I knew that that was going to be a struggle, and so the first thing I did was what I think a lot of us would do. We would reach out to our friends and our family and say we were struggling and say we needed help. And I'm really fortunate in that I have a group of friends that I consider to be family, as well as my biological family is fairly close with each other. But sharing some of these things was hard, partially because my ex-husband and I actually have a lot of mutual friends. We both are fairly well known in the tech community as well, so it was very hard for me to share these things diplomatically and share my hurts. But I needed that help and I needed that support, and my closest friends were unfortunately people I shared with them. And fortunately, our friends are amazing people and they've managed to stay friends with both of us to this day. But by opening up and by being vulnerable with my friends, I got the emotional support I needed. I knew that if I was struggling, I could text my friends. I knew that the day we had to put my dog down, a group of friends met me at a restaurant and we basically had a wake for my dog. And I knew that as I was going through kind of all of these losses last year, one of the things I could rely on was a group of friends that I do a soccer tailgate with. And so what really kind of struck me is this past spring I was doing a talk at Stir Trek on mental health and tech, and I got to the point where I was talking about the importance of having a support system. And somebody from my support system, somebody from my tailgate was the moderator in my room. I looked at him and I almost started crying because I thought about how important he'd been. So unfortunately, though, the mental illness, as much as it gave me the support I needed, the mental illness and loss also affected my professional life. And so it's a lot easier to reach out to our friends. There are friends, they don't judge us, but I also had to reach out to a lot of people I knew professionally. The first thing I did was I had to reach out to HR and my manager, because when you're having a bad depression day, sometimes you can't get out of bed as easily. Sometimes you struggle. When you experience a great loss, it can be hard to focus on your work all the time. And so my management needed to know where I was coming from so they didn't think I was just slacking off and failing at my job. So I told them about my diagnosis, I told them about the struggles I was going through, and I told them about some of the accommodations that I needed in order to overcome depression in the workplace. And as a result of that, I actually found out I received a lot of empathy and I received a sense of security. So, not a lawyer either, but if you have a disability, and depression and anxiety disorder are considered disabilities under the ADA, your employer is legally required to accommodate those things with what's called reasonable accommodations. And so it gave me a sense of security knowing that my employer had, consequences if they weren't going to support me. The other thing, and I think the cooler thing about this is I opened up about some of my struggles with my managers and my coworkers. Other people in the office started opening up, and other people started being willing to share their struggles. So it made the whole office feel a little bit safer. There are a lot of people I admire, and this was an area that I struggled with. I had to back out of one of my conference talks. I had to explain a lot of awkward situations to people, and I was probably a little bit more distracted than usual at some of my events, forgot things, and had to fight back tears on more than one occasion. But I didn't want to lose my credibility as a speaker, and I didn't want to harm my professional reputation, so I had to let people know why I wasn't fully being myself. And same thing when I lost my job, I was worried people would think I was incompetent. So again, I took control of the situation, I was vulnerable, I explained what happened, and that gave me some level of control over something I couldn't control. By me telling my story, and by me telling my struggles, and by me taking ownership of it, other people weren't seeing me as rude, other people weren't seeing me as flaky, and people weren't making up their own stories. So it allowed me to regain some level of control, and when we have more control, we feel a little bit less scared. I also had to reach out to my peers, people within the tech community, friends, and people I knew casually, because people were noticing I wasn't always my usual outgoing and friendly self, that I wasn't as social as normal, and so I told them some of the things I was struggling with. And the interesting thing was, as I opened up about the loss of my husband, or as I opened up about some of my issues with depression, other people started opening up about those things, and I formed deeper connections. There was a summer evening last year at Music City Tech. The conference takes place on a college campus, and they host us in dorm rooms, and so at the end of the evening, everybody's sitting out in the dorm courtyard talking, and we stayed up till all hours talking about not technology, not about Agile, not about any of that stuff. We talked about relationships in life and really, really bonded as a result of doing that. And when you do this at work, when you do this among your tech community, when you do this with others, it makes your teams feel more connected because you can feel vulnerable. And the other cool thing, this is one of my favorite quotes about friendship, by C.S. Lewis: "Friendship is unnecessary, like philosophy, like art, it has no survival value. It's one of those things which give value to survival." And the reason I bring that up is that I knew that people I knew professionally, as I told them about my losses and my struggles, they opened up to me about their losses and their struggles. And in a lot of cases, we actually bonded over some of our shared experiences. It turned out 2 other people were going through the loss of a spouse. It turned out somebody else had their dog, was sick and not doing well. So we all bonded about that and could support each other in a way that we wouldn't have been able to. And since all of that happened, several of those people have reached back out to me for help or support. It happened last week. I was at a conference in Kansas City. Somebody DM'd me on Twitter and said, "Hey, Cassandra, do you have a few minutes to talk about something personal?" And I said, "Absolutely." And so I felt like this person I just met in a conference, who was just a casual acquaintance, he and I had connected on another level. And it was really a cool moment that he trusted in me and knew that he could talk to me. And the other thing is that in tech, a lot of times we're very logical. We are very black and white. And so it can be hard for us to admit to vulnerability and to weakness, just like Kendra was saying. And vulnerability is risky. Being vulnerable is scary. It's especially scary in our logical, productive, black and white industry. And sometimes the things that would make us feel most vulnerable aren't logical. And so they're still valid, though, and they're still something we should open up about. So yes, I risked things. I risked the loss of people in my life. I risked a loss of opportunities, and I did lose some people, but not nearly as many as I feared. And in retrospect, I realized that those people and those opportunities I did not belong in my life. So it's okay. It's okay if we're vulnerable, and it's okay if we lose things as a result of vulnerability, because it just makes room for the things that are really important to our life. So that's the power of vulnerability. On the surface, it looks like we're revealing things that we shouldn't. Looks like we're exposing ourselves to attack, and that's a risk, but it's well worth it. We gain more than we lose by being vulnerable. We gain support and empathy from others. We get deeper connections with others, and hopefully encourage people to open up about their own vulnerabilities. And like I said before, it helps us regain some of that control around scary situations. So ultimately, the scary situations pass, and we come out stronger in the end.